Hello again and welcome to another Pixel Game Maker tutorial. Today we're going to do character busts when you're using show message. It's one of the easiest ways to get text on there. There's also going to be a few show message tips if you're new to that plugin. And so with that said, let's get started. All right, so here's the quick scene setup. You'll see that we have one NPC here. We have another NPC that I just discolored. And when we play, you can see that I have the field of vision set so that we know when we can trigger them for both of them. And that's just the general setup for it. We also had to make sure that show message was installed, and we also made sure that the BGM imported. When you install this plugin by right-clicking and add official plugin, it will then come with an import, and this is where your show message background is. All right, so with the show message plugin installed, now we needed to add in the busts. So we went here and I just grabbed some busts off itch. This one was just a witch, and then we had the player, or that I'm using as a player, and there was just a few different variations of the face. Next thing I did was I went to the busts animation, and I created one for the NPC, or for the NPCs, I should say. If you can see, I have NPC 1 here and NPC 2 here, and then I gave them just directions. You could use animation frames as well, but I felt that with this setup, I kind of like them separated, and I'll show you why in just a second. But you can see that I gave each one a normal, angry, and happy. So you could see that you could just do as many as you wanted. NPC 1 has the same. And then with the player, you could have as many as you wanted. This one, you could really get away with doing animation frame. I just kept it like this just for this. If you don't know how to use animation frames, I do have video. Jesse has video as well, so check out one of those. And we got normal, angry, and happy on this one, just for play testing here. And then here are the NPC actual sprites. If I zoom in here, we can see them. All right, so in the object tab, I just have a simple character. And then we have the NPC 1 and the NPC 2. These are the two different examples of how to use show message. And then we have the bust control from the player and the bust control from the NPC. All right, so there's two main things that we need for this to work. And one of them is, or one pair of them are in the common variables and switches. So if we go to the switches, you can see that I have a bust active switch, and this is going to basically be turned on at the start of a dialogue, and then it's going to be turned off at the end of the dialogue. And what that switch is really for, it's to destroy the busts at the end, because these busts are going to be generated. So the bust control player and the bust control for the NPCs or characters or whatever, they're going to be generated each time you show message. We can see that if we click on, let's click on example 1 here, that works. So on this NPC, when we press A and we are in the field of vision, then we start to show our messages. And the first thing that we do is we turn that bust active on, and that is going to allow the images to stay on the screen. Otherwise, as I showed you in here, they're going to be destroyed in this common action, because that's what this is looking for. If it's off, then it's going to shoot and to destroy. And I did dead end this one just in case. And also when you destroy, make sure none's on here, or else your busts will all be there when you come back to the scene. All right, so the next thing that you need, along with the switch, the common switch, are a couple common variables. And so I just named this one bust NPCs and bust player. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually determine, the value is going to determine which bust to show. So in the NPCs case, you can see, well, let's start with the player because it's easier. The default value is 0. And when it's 0, that means that it's off. There's no image showing. And then when it's 1, it's a normal face. When it's 2, it's an angry face. And then when it's 3, it's happy. So we have this, we can take notes and gauge what our values are easier. And it's actually even super easier when you're going to implement it. I'll show you here in a minute. And now if we go to the bust NPC, we can see that it's similar, except for what I did to kind of keep the NPCs in the same number, at least whole number, is I did 0 equals off, and then I did NPC 1 equals 1, and it's the NPC 1 normal face, and then 1.1 is going to be the NPC 1 angry face, and then 1.2 is going to be the happy face. So I kept the digits to be the other faces for them. And you can actually even break this down. So you're not just limited to 1.1, 1.2 up to 2. You could actually do 1.11. You could go double decimals if you need, because you have float values right here. You have the 2 decimal float values. So that is one way that you could just more easily keep your faces in notes for their values. All right, so right now we just have 2 NPCs, so I have NPC 1 and then NPC 2. All right, so those are the only variables that you need as well. So now let's go into the objects, exactly what's happening. Let's go back to the example here where I showed where we turn the switch on, and then let's see what we do next. The next steps that we do is we generate the bus control, and we generate, or for the NPC and the one for the player. So these 2 objects right here. So at the start of every dialogue, we generate these 2 objects. You can see it's the same in this example as well. Message 1 generates the objects, and then message 2 and the rest do not. All right, so now that we generated these objects, we need to place them on the scene, like in the accurate position. And that is actually done in the bus controls themselves. So the first thing, well, there's a couple things we need to do. So in the setup of both the player and the NPC one, the first thing that it does is it moves to the highest layer, and that's always going to be layer 1. So we can just blanket put a move to layer 1, and that is going to be the highest layer, so it's above everything, because show message is above everything. One quick edit about layer 1 when you're moving to layer 1 on the player and the NPC bus control is that if your objects are already on layer 1, then you're actually going to want them to be the highest most display priority. And so you do that by just simply going to object settings and making them a display priority of 10. And so I'm just going to do this anyway with both of them. That way, if something is on the highest layer, the layer 1 anyway, it will be above those objects as well. Because I don't use display priority that high usually, especially on a top-down game where you want them kind of the same for the auto Y sorting. And so that would be a way to get that is by setting this to 10. The next thing that we need to do is we need to move it in position. And so what I did, just to show you how I got these coordinates, and this is very important, I selected coordinates are display area based. All right, so I'll show you here what I did. And then I made it be instant, I made it be the object self, and then I made it to where it stopped action during the movement. So it's going to make sure that it's in that position before it moves on. All right, so let's talk about these coordinates, how I got these coordinates, and what this coordinate are display base is exactly doing. The other thing I want to point out before that, though, is that I did have these fixed relative position to camera. That way, if you do want to move, if you want to have a cut scene where you're moving, and I'll just show you here real quick. If you want to have a cut scene where you're moving, you can see that the bust now moves with the camera. All right, and that's what this option is for right here, fixed relative position to camera. And then once the setup moves it into position, it's going to be fixed right there. So what I did was in the animations under the busts, I actually floored these because I wanted to, I was just experimenting, but I floored these because I wanted an easy Y axis, I think, for right here. And then what I did is I went to the scenes and I actually had them out here. I had the busts out here and I was just positioning them. You want to make sure that you are positioning them in this top left corner. And the reason why is because you want to make sure that you're in the coordinate for this. Coordinates are display area based. Basically, when this camera's moving around, so let's see here. Let's find this point where this character is. So this character is at 204 and 192 right here. Now, that's all in well right in this area. But if the camera, let's just move this camera here. If the camera was to go right here, and we moved the player or this character into a similar position, you can see that it's definitely not that coordinate at all. However, if you're using a move object, coordinate are display area based, then this number will actually equal this number because it's in the camera. So it takes the camera's association, and it uses it as if it's the very top left scene that you have in your scene. So when you're setting stuff that is going to be display area based, you want to set it up at the top left portion of your screen. So if I had a scene that was, well, this, let's see, what is it, 4 and let's say 3, I would make sure that my bus setup is in this top left corner. And those coordinates, so I would take this right here and I would move it right here. And I'd say this is the bust. Let's just say this is a giant bust here, like that. And I'd be like, okay, I want my bust right there. And then boom, I got my coordinates. I can then fill them in right here. And since I'm doing display area based, it's going to move to the camera in that area. I hope that made sense. Let me fix my mess here. Okay, so that's the setup, is you move to layer 1 and then you move to the coordinate that you want it to display in, as well as being fixed position. And this is the same for the player and the NPC. All right, so now let's continue with the actual dialogue logic here. And we'll see that the next thing that I do after I generate these objects is that I change the variable of the bust for the player and the bust for the NPC. This is going to be your initial setup basically right here. And it's going to be how do you want this to be? And so the first one I have is I have the bust player as 1, which an easy way to do this is when you're setting this up here is you can actually just hover over your variable right here and it's going to show you your notes in a little pop-up. It'll disappear after a little bit, but it will show you your notes. And so you can see that 1 is my normal face. Really easy to then associate your values really quick without having to go to the tab and look at them again. All right, so I know that my player is going to be a normal face, and then if I hover over here, a value of 0 is going to be off. So the NPC 1 is going to be off. And then we're going to show message. And so with show message, you just pick a text, and then you can adjust the speed of the font or the speed of the text, how it's appearing. You can have it instant if you want. And then I'm just doing a black. You could also do the white frame as well, and you can make your own custom ones. I have a whole video on this if you want. And then you can position it. Usually with bust, you want it on the bottom. And I guess you could get away with other ways, but I think bottom looks really good with this setup. All right, so once we have that set up, the show message plugin, how it works, it's going to pause it right here. All right, so you can see that I have a bunch of other stuff right here, but it's going to pause this logic as soon as it gets to show message. And then once you click the OK button or the A button, I can't remember which one it's looking for, but whenever you press that button that it's looking for, then it's going to continue the logic. And so then we're going to be going to the next message, and that is going to be bust, player bust is going to be equal to 2. So if we hover over that, you can see that I'm making her angry now. And then the NPC bust is still 0. Now this is redundant. I could actually delete this and it would be fine. But it could also be a way just to keep you understanding what you're doing in this scene. And then it's going to go to the next show message, which is now the player is angry. And if you're not familiar with how to create text, you just go to the text tab here and you create all this text. You have to create a text resource. And this is a sample project, so it was in Japanese, but normally this will be in English for you. You have to create a specific text for each text as a resource for easy localization. I have a video on that if you want to see exactly what I'm talking about there. All right, so continuing on, that would be message 2. And then you can see that the next one, the player bust is at 0, and then the NPC bust is at 1.1. So if we look at 1.1, then that is going to be the NPC 1 is angry. And then we show the message, NPC 1 is now angry. And then the last thing is we show bust 3 for the player, which is happy. And then the bust 0 is going to be 0, so it's going to disappear basically. We'll show the last message, which is player now happy. And then the very last thing we do is after you press A out of this, then we click the bust active to be off, or we change it to be off, and then the busts destroy themselves. Right, simple edit here. I showed all the logic, but I forgot to show the link out, and it's just a simple message has ended. And this is able to catch all of these messages in this case, because we're just going straight down and we're providing no waits or anything like that. So you can see we just go to this show message, it pauses, and then when we press the OK or the A button, it goes doon doon, and then goes to this show message, and so on and so on. But the second that we add a wait, let's say that we add a wait in between this show message, the first one and the second one, the second it hits that wait, it's going to break this condition, and this is going to ring true. And the reason why is because as of 1.0.3, the wait runtime action will not prevent conditions from ringing true. So once this action hits the wait, these conditions can start triggering. And so an easy way to prevent this is we could utilize our bus active, because we turn it on at the very beginning. So we could utilize when it's off to actually be our trigger. So we can go into this link, we can delete this, and we can select for the common bus active to be off. And in this case, if you do all your messages like this, you can get away with actually just going to switches and calling this like dialogue active. And so it could just be a general dialogue switch. And then when your dialogue's active, your bus can't die. And then when your dialogue turns off, that is the condition for this or anything that you need. Now, if you're making more of a cutscene type where you need movement and stuff like that, I would recommend watching Abstract's tutorial that he made on that, because that's going to give you an alternative method to move these NPCs around and things like that. All right. Now, one cool thing, and I just want to show you the difference here real quick. By doing all your messages in the same runtime action, you get an appearance like this. All right. So you go up and you read, this is NPC 1. And watch how there's no transition of the message background or nothing. You just hit the button and it instantly goes to the next one. And it looks really smooth, like nice transitions, and then it fades out. Whereas we have this other method, which we really haven't talked about yet, but it's a method where it does one message, and then it uses the link that comes with the plugin called message has ended. So when the message has ended, it goes to the next message, and I've segregated them in these actions here. Now let's see what this one looks like. So now when you talk, you can see it fades in, and then it says NPC2 is mad. You'll see that it fades out, and then it fades back in, and it says player is happy. It fades out, and then fades back in, NPC player is happy. And then it fades out, fades back in, they're both happy. So that is the biggest difference. And the thing is do you want dialogue that is consistent, like the message box just stays on the screen the whole time? Then you're going to want to do it like example 1. But there might be times where you want it to fade in and out, or have little things happen in between them, in which case you're going to want to do example 2, which is where you show the message and then you use the message has ended condition to be your link out of that message. Okay, so now that we've talked about the tips there on the show message and a little bit about the logic setup between them, let's talk about exactly what these variables are doing in the busts themselves. So let's take example bust player equals 1 and bust NPC equals 0. All right, let's go to the player first. So once you're set up and it moves into position, you go to a processing. Very similar to other processing systems like my HUD Life, my original one, and stuff like that. There's a very common practice here. And what this processing is doing is you can see that it takes over motion. All right. So it's taking over whatever motion it has, but in the setup has no motion. So initially, if something is set to 0, like the NPC bus, for instance, then it's just going to sit in processing until it's ready. Now, once I change the variable of the bus player to equal 1, which is what I do in example 1, then it's going to go to the normal face and it's going to sit there until it's not equal to 1. Then after that, it's going to go back to processing and it's going to readjust according to the variable value. So let's say that the next one I changed it to 2. Well, now it's going to drop into angry. And then let's say I'd change it to 3, then it's going to drop into happy. If it's not equal to 3, it's going to leave happy and it's going to go to whatever value it is. And if it's not a value to get in one of these, it's just going to stay. So your happy will get stuck because of this takes over motion. So it will say you weren't happy and you go to processing and you don't have anywhere else to go, it will be stuck. However, the 0 is a little different. You can see the bust equals 0. What 0 does is it actually turns off the bust anim and then it goes back to processing. So in the common actions here, I have another common action, turn off the bust anim. It's dead-ended as well. And it's looking for one thing. If the player bust, because this is the control for the player, if the player bust equals 0, then that means that you want it to be turned off. So you go to a action that has no motion, and then you execute object action back to processing. So you're basically turning off the motion and then going back to processing, waiting for one of these to be true again. And that is really it. You can expand this as much as you want, and it's all set up good to go. The NPC portion is a little bit different. And the reason why is because you're going to have a lot of NPCs. You might even want to have multiple bus controls, maybe one for area 1, a bus control for area 2, and then the NPCs in those areas would just generate the proper area bus control. But I found that this is a pretty simple way to have just everything right there and to be flexible, a little flexible. So all I did here, it's the exact same setup as the player. So you do the setup. They move to a different side of the screen though, and then they go to processing. Now, these are just shortcut processings so that I could kind of differentiate what NPC is what, but it has the same destroy and the same turn off the bust animation, except for it's looking for the bust NPC to equal 0. And so then we go to the setup here and we have the same things. If it's equal to 1, then you are 1 normal. If it's equal to 1.1, then it's going to be angry. If you're not equal to 1.1, it's going to come out to processing and it's going to read which one it is next. Now, the cool thing about these shortcuts is these links are all technically part of this one action node. It doesn't look like it, but if you were to turn on, I think it's this one where if you click on one, it darkens everything. If you click on processing, it will show you everything that is linked to it. And you can see that all of these links are linked to processing. All right, so how I did this was I just went and created a shortcut, and then you can drag it out like so, and then you could have your next set of NPC or character busts that you would use, and then you would just change the value accordingly. So that's why the system really made sense to me, because you can literally just control them with 3 things: a switch to turn them on and to say when the dialogue is basically on and over, and then 2, you bounce between 2 variables before you show the message on which bus to show. And to me, it just made a lot of sense. And then you use your show message to do that out accordingly. In example 2, you'll notice that I didn't turn off the bust until after the final message is shown. And that was because I didn't want the bust to turn off too quick. Note that if you were using action text plugin or just the normal show text way to show message, this is probably going to be the system that you're going to want to use, this drop down action system, because they have to basically destroy before they create. That's one reason I like show message. It's a very automatic system and it pauses right here. That's incredible. All right, so this video is running a little longer. It's why I kind of had to show just what I did instead of walk through it, or else it would have been a really long one. So we'll just show this one more time. If there's any questions you have, feel free to visit the Discord or the Steam forum. We'll get you figured out on these plugins and messaging. And with that said, I'll see you at the next video.